You cannot rebuild your house and home without the right materials. Similarly, you cannot rebuild your brain without the right materials. In this series and prevention of cognitive decline and learning all the things that we can do about keeping our brain sharp, the first part of the series, we talked about clearing out the inflammation, reducing your toxic exposures. The next step in brain longevity and cognitive recovery is reconstruction, cell by cell and pathway by pathway. In this full-length lecture, I'm going to reveal some of the most overlooked nutrients required to restore and rebuild your brain's architecture. Not every single one of them, but some of the main ones that you may not know about, and bring them to your attention, especially after years of silent degeneration. We need to make sure we're bringing those in there. Now, I welcome your conversation on this, and this is me just bringing some awareness to you about some things that I think are very important. And this is a longer video. I'm going to try to go as in depth as I can. And this is, of course, from the series that I'm teaching for the Gata Institute. So this is a little bit of an overview, but I'm going to give you as much as I can in this time here today. So we're talking about the nutrients that we need for the brain. And if we don't have them, like we just said, we cannot rebuild the brain. And if you're not familiar with who I am yet, I do speak across the country, actually the world now, on holistic health and ways to provide your body with everything it needs to do the healing it's intended to do. I speak on thyroid function and brain and immune system and mental health and cardiovascular. All of these are topics that all get tied into holistic nutrition. And I just want to make sure that I'm making everything that I'm teaching available to anybody who's ready, willing, and able to learn it. So we're going to talk about the nutrient-brain connection today. The brain is a nutrient-hungry organ. The brain makes up only 2% of your body weight, but it uses over 20% of your energy. So the fuel for that definitely matters. And we have a ton of malnutrition in our age of abundance. And I'm just bringing this up to remind us that just because we're eating a lot of food doesn't mean we're getting the right foods to be nourishing our body to keep us as healthy as we need to be for as long as possible. Many people are overfed but undernourished, deficient in key neuroprotective nutrients, especially due to the processed foods, because everything's removed from the processed foods, and our soils that have a greatly diminished microbiome. Now, I say that because we used to think that we've removed the nutrients from the soil from overharvesting. But what actually has happened is that these herbicides, pesticides, and fungicides that are sprayed on these crops to try to make sure that they're not eaten up by the pests, they actually kill the microbiome of the soil. And those microbiome components of the soil help to bring the nutrients into the plant. So we are getting less from commercially grown products because we don't have the microbiome of the soil. Just an interesting point of differentiation there. And this image is the idea, right? People are getting just a shell of what they should be getting when it comes to their nutrition. Now, I also want to just kind of bring this up because 53% of malnourished households in the US still have an overweight or obese person in that household. So again, it's not that we're not getting enough food necessarily. We're just not getting food that's actually nourishing us and healing us. And this is where I really want everybody to know that we cannot just live on carbs alone. We have to have these other nutrients that are going to be essential for rebuilding us. So deficiency when it comes to the brain specifically creates vulnerability, in my perspective, in three specific ways. Inflammation, which is our standard American diet, is initiating 20 times the inflammation and only resolving it one time in our 20-to-1 ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s. And many other things that are contributing to it, like we talked about last time, the different chemicals, all these insults to the brain create inflammation. We get impaired signaling when we have deficiency, and of course, we get neurodegeneration. And I mentioned this a lot, and so I wanted to share with you the research that I got this from, that about 330 billion cells are replaced every day. And that's the equivalent to about 1% of all of our cells. And in 80 to 100 days, 30 trillion will have been replenished. That's 30 trillion opportunities to get it right every 80 to 100 days. And so this is what I want to point out again, is we constantly have the opportunity to be creating healthy cells, but we simply cannot do it if we're not giving our body what it needs to make healthy cells. We can't make them magically appear out of thin air. And I love this chart where it shows the majority of them are red blood cells that we're replacing. So roughly of the 30 trillion human cells, about 72% of those by mass are fat and muscle, which last about an average of 12 to 50 years respectively. And each rectangle, if you're looking at this and not listening, or you're just listening and not looking at it, there are rectangles that are throughout this human body. And each of those rectangles represents 1% of all the 30 trillion cells. That's roughly equivalent to the number of cells the body sheds and produces daily. And I'm pointing out here that the brain is not even a full one of those rectangles. So we are replacing brain. We're just not doing it at the rapid rate that we're replacing things like red blood cells, because those are definitely going to have a much shorter turnover in the body than your brain cells. So your brain has this huge job. We got to make sure we're taking care of it. The brain runs on about 20 watts of power. And I think it's fun to note that that's enough power to light a light bulb. And all that power calls for some much needed rest and nutrients. One piece of brain tissue, the size of a grain of sand, contains 100,000 neurons and 1 billion synapses. So very much a lot going on up there, a lot more than we really think about. And I just throw a little sidebar in here. I'm going to get into this later into this series, that adequate sleep really helps maintain the pathways in your brain too. We have to do that. But you can't heal what you don't feed. So neurons, if we're going to get way down, if we're going to zoom way in, neurons are composed of both protein and fat. The myelin sheath, which insulates and protects the axon of the neuron, is primarily made of fat. So that's what they call lipids. Lipids are fats and a smaller amount of protein. And so a neuron's cell body, including the nucleus and other components, also contains protein. Additionally, the brain, which is made up of about billions of neurons, of course, is about 60% fat. And research is suggesting that the human brain consists of about 86 billion neurons, and each neuron forms connections to other neurons, which could add up to 1 quadrillion or 1,000 trillion connections. Okay, so I'm only saying all this to show you that there's a massive amount of opportunity to heal, and we have to have both protein and fat to be able to provide the materials, the raw materials, to rebuild these neurons. And over time, the neurons can combine and further increase storage capacity, but we cannot do any of that without protein and fat. And if you're actually watching and not just listening, this is the exact same slide. I just replaced the neuron with an egg, a bunch of eggs, because I want to point out that they are an excellent source of both fat and protein. This is the beginning of my conversation with you about the importance of including some good healthy eggs in your diet as much as appropriate for you. The healing equation we're going to talk about here is talking about nourishing your body to rebuild it. Of course, we've got 3 pounds in the average adult brain is how much we've got going in, weighing in there. The brain is about 60% fat. Like I said, the remaining 40% is a combination of water, protein, carbohydrates, and salts. That's also very important. I'm just not getting into that too deep in this specific portion of the lecture. But the brain itself is not a muscle. So I'm going to point out something else that is very similar to that in protein and fat content. And if you're just listening and not watching, it's a picture of a fish. Fish, I'm sure you've heard, or maybe you're not old enough to have heard your grandmother tell you that it is brain food. And again, nourishment is protection. We need essential nutrients. They are not optional. They are essential. They are protective agents, cofactors, and builders of resilience. And I'm going to say this over and over again. You cannot heal what you do not feed. Recovery and protection require nutritional sufficiency. So this is where I turn this conversation about fish. And I'm going to give you specifically one fish. Fish from the ocean are going to give you all kinds of nutrients and great things. But I've talked a lot about the value of sardines, and I'm just going to offer them up here. For those of you who haven't tried them yet, I'm going to show you many reasons why I think that they could be very beneficial to many, many people to include them in their lives. Eating more sardines instead of fish oil supplementation is the study I'm showing here. And it talks about how sardines are an important source of amino acids, including arginine, taurine, and others. I highlight taurine here because there's a ton of research out there and so many people saying, oh, take a taurine supplement. You need to take more taurine. Taurine is this huge longevity piece. Well, why don't we get it from whole foods so we get all of the other nutrients that we're going to get, so we don't have to take a supplement for every single one of them? In one sardine, you don't get just the taurine, you get calcium, potassium, magnesium, zinc, iron, selenium, taurine, arginine, and many other nutrients, which together modulate mild inflammation and exacerbated oxidative stress. So it helps us with oxidative stress and inflammation. And then I also want to point out that they have omega-3. Sardine intake increases the omega-3 index. So it is a multivitamin swimming around in the ocean. Now, someone will say, wait a minute. What about mercury, right? You can't eat fish because mercury is bad for you. And yes, mercury is bad for you. As a potent and seemingly irreversible inhibitor of the key antioxidant selenoenzymes, mercury does hinder the actions of glutathione peroxidases. Glutathione, for those of you who don't know, is our master antioxidant. And the binding to these, at the active sites of these enzymes results in an impaired antioxidant protection. So yes, mercury not only creates problems, it keeps us from being able to clean up the problems, and that can be an issue in larger fish like tuna. But I want to point out very clearly here, the well-documented toxicological effects of mercury can be partially mitigated by selenium intake, which is incorporated to synthesize new selenoenzymes. And if this proposed rationale is correct, it is worth noting that sardines contain considerable selenium content. This is a huge thing that so many people are missing. A lot of people with thyroid problems, they start taking a bunch of iodine, but they forget that the selenium has to be there. And this is what's so brilliant about nature, is it's already included selenium and iodine in the fish for us. And unlike tuna, they are placed at a mid-trophic level near the base of the food web. So what are we saying here? The smaller the fish, the less the bioaccumulation of the mercury. Therefore, exposed to lower mercury accumulation as compared to larger predatory fish, which are deemed to contain higher levels of the methyl mercury. So remember that if you're eating the fish, the whole fish, you're not only potentially getting maybe some mercury, you're getting all the things that your body needs to help detoxify the mercury, things like selenium and iodine also. So there's a lot more value in it than what we're giving it accountability for here in the fish. Now, the other thing that these sardines have that we didn't talk about yet is something called ribonucleic acid. Now, RNA, this is a quote from a guy named John Courtney, who was the head of R&D for a company called Standard Process for over 30 years. This guy did some tremendous research. He said they help build cells by supporting protein synthesis. Well, we just talked about how the neurons have protein in them. In order to create those new proteins, we got to have some ribonucleic acid. And he says it's of merit for most people with mental aberrations, people who cannot remember things, for example, people who lose their ability to think properly, as well as their memory, need RNA. Of course, we need to get it from food sources, and there are other sources. This one that I'm showing a picture of here is they actually created a supplement for it from a yeast source. So it's not the sardine source, but they also go on to talk about this guy named Dr. Ben Frank. Now, again, I'm not saying everything that Dr. Frank has said is absolute truth. I'm presenting you with some information so that you can learn about your options. And as in everything I'm saying here, I don't claim to know everything about everything, but I want to make sure that you are aware of what people are talking about that maybe you're not being made aware of. Dr. Frank wrote this book called Nucleic Acid Therapy in Aging and Degenerative Disease. And he found that deteriorating cells can be rejuvenated if provided with substances that directly nourish them, substances such as nucleic acids. Now, recently have brought my attention back to the importance of other nutrients that help us with these formulations, things like folate. Whole food folate is going to be important. That will be in a later portion of what I'm teaching on this subject. But all of this is important to know that we do need to have some RNA. And Dr. Frank said that you can look and feel 6 to 12 years longer than you actually are if you have enough of this. Now, we talk a lot about this new function health test that's coming out, and it's showing a lot of people are having their biological age be much younger. And clearly, these are people who are very interested in their long-term health. And so far, we have had most of the people that have come back that we've run these tests on an average of 10 years younger. So I'm not saying it's because of the RNA, but I'm saying that perhaps if we're replacing all these cells with all the nutrients they need, we're going to have a better job of doing that. So that brings me to another nutrient that might potentially be in the sardines, but it's not actually qualified as a nutrient as of yet. And I want everyone to be aware of this book. I talked about Dr. Ray Dorsey's book in the last lecture. This one is called The Promise of Lithium. This is by Dr. Thomas Gattoso, MD. And he's talking about how an over-the-counter supplement may prevent and slow Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. He talks about how low-dose lithium therapy has been shown in 2 studies to slow cognitive decline in patients with Alzheimer's disease and pre-Alzheimer's disease, a condition called mild cognitive impairment, or MCIs. And lithium therapy did not cause any side effects in these studies. In addition, lithium therapy has been associated with increased brain volume in contrast to the decreased brain volume or shrinkage caused by all the 3 anti-amyloid therapies. So what he's referring to here is that there are medications that have been approved that are intended to help with these diseases of cognitive decline and dementia. But I'm going to share with you a little bit of what he points out about these. Okay, there's 2 Alzheimer's disease therapies that have been approved by the FDA. One's called aducanumab, one's called lecanemab, and they do show a reduction in some symptoms, 22% and 27%, and they work by clearing a toxic protein from the brain called beta amyloid. Now, this whole theory has been questioned. I'm just to be totally clear, I'm not saying that I agree with this theory or that this is the way I would think it should be done. I'm just sharing you through what is known and what's been approved. But it also should be known that these can cause brain swelling and or bleeding, and they have shown the aducanumab has shown to cause that in 41% of the people, and 21% is from the other medication. And he also points out, and he says in here that the administered this lecanemab is administered by intravenous infusion every other week for 18 months. And the patients need to receive brain PET scans and MRIs before starting it, and MRIs after the 5th, 7th, and 14th infusion. So that seems like an awful lot of invasion into your life. And the annual cost for this medication is $26,500 a year, plus the cost of the infusion visits and the brain scans. So you can see why you may want to look at other options instead of just relying on this. So he points out the value of lithium might be something that could be very helpful for anybody with cognitive decline. And this research study, the Forlenza study, does show some really cool, interesting aspects that a good lithium source can do for you. Now, I believe they were using the form that is actually the current medication, lithium carbonate, which is one of the World Health Organization's essential medications. And that is, as you'll see in this slide here, bipolar disorder is the first thing. And that's what it was shown to be approved for. But you'll see below that, it also has all these other benefits, things like increased BDNF, that's brain-derived neurotropic factor, and an increase in something called autophagy. I don't know if you are aware of what that is, but the concept of this was what helped win the medical Nobel Prize several years ago, because it's so important for our health. It's this aspect of our body where it goes into self-cleaning after we've been fasted for a while. But really cool to know that lithium actually helps with this Nobel Prize winning concept for our health as well. And he also, this study for Lenza even talks about, Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's and many different conditions, not just bipolar disorder. But he is pointing out that an increase of brain-derived BDNF, or brain-derived neurotropic factor, and autophagy seems to be very consistent. And of course, reduction in some of the plaquing of the tau plaquing. And so again, I'm just kind of giving you I'm getting too deep into here. I'm sorry about that. I just want to reveal to you that lithium has also been regarded as a neuroprotective agent and a candidate drug for disease modification in certain neurodegenerative disorders like Alzheimer's disease and ALS and Parkinson's. Now, I want to share some other research that kind of helps us look more deeply into this. Now, I think that Dr. Gattoso is doing a fantastic job of helping bring attention to the possibilities here. But here's another study that was in 2014 that was showing the neuroprotective effects of lithium, implications for the treatments of Alzheimer's disease and neurodegenerative disorders. And it says in there, this effect is probably due to the modulation of multiple biological cascades. And that's what I love about this. There are many, many things that it's actually helping your body with. And I always say that I don't want to know that something's working. I want to know why it's working. And if we know that it's working on multiple biological cascades that are involved in cell survival, neuronal plasticity, transcriptional control, energetic metabolism, and resilience against neurotoxic insults, I think that's enough for us to keep looking a little bit deeper at it. Here's another study that talks about it promoting neuronal repair. And this was specifically looking at people with depression, but it's important to note that there is a connection between depression and cognitive decline. In this study, they said we provided for the first time evidence for the ability of lithium to promote NPC proliferation and survival neuronal differentiation of newly generated cells. I'm going to just cut to the chase here. It says it is possible that lithium is capable of facilitating neurogenesis after neuronal damage, meaning growing new brain. And there's a lot of evidence out there showing that this is involved in helping us grow new brain, which is so phenomenal to know about. And I think what we don't realize is that lithium is a trace mineral that we would be getting from water, we would maybe getting from seafood, which is really important to note. That I think we should start having a deeper, better, longer conversation about lithium as an actual essential nutrient and not just as something that we don't regard as part of our nutrition. There's another study that was in 2021 talking about lithium treatment in human hippocampal neurogenesis. The hippocampus is a part of your brain that has a lot to do with memory. And so if we're going to regrow that hippocampus, that's pretty cool to know that lithium can be helpful in that. Lithium accumulates in the neurogenic regions of the brain and exerts a positive effect on hippocampal volume. So where do we find lithium? Now, this is what's interesting is I got this map that I'm showing here from a record that was calling it a contaminant in the water. And if it's naturally occurring in water and we're seeing all this evidence of it having this effect to help with neurogenesis, again, I really think we should review and rethink whether or not this is an essential nutrient or not. And my belief at this point is that it is an essential nutrient. And this shows you that there are areas around the country where there are concentrations in the soil and water and areas where it's not. And so we have to be aware of where we live before we can actually determine if we're going to get it from our water or if we're going to get it from, as this says here, mineral-rich water, nuts, grains, or seaweed. And so nuts grown in these areas where you're seeing the lighter colors may not have any lithium in them. So we wonder if we're trying to get this trace element, we need to get it from areas that are shown to have it in the water and the soil. I like that they mentioned seaweed in this study. And so I do think that there is this connection with a lot of things in the ocean and having an appropriate amount of lithium. I do not have enough evidence right now to go deeper into that speculation, but that is my current speculation. And this also talks about microdosing supplements as well. And there are a lot of practitioners who've been using forms of it for a very long time. A specific form that I have been driven to respect the most is the lithium orotate versus the carbonate. I get into an entire different lecture on that specifically, but for those of you who are considering learning more about that. And then iodine. I do want to bring up iodine because it is an ignored yet essential mineral. And I think it bears repeating that there is so much that is involved in the brain with iodine. Iodine deficiency is a worldwide nutritional problem involving 130 countries and well more than 1 billion people at risk of not having enough iodine. And this is an essential nutrient again. And I bring this to light when it comes to specifically things like Parkinson's, because the part of the brain that is affected is something called the substantia nigra. And there is a large portion of the dry weight of that part of your brain that is iodine. So clearly we need it in the brain. Iodine powers the brain. And again, neurological complications of malnutrition point out that it's an estimated 35% of the world's population. This is actually 1.99 billion. So I said over 1 billion before, it's almost 2 billion, have insufficient iodine intake. And recent research focuses on subclinical iodine deficiency. There was a 1994 meta-analysis of 18 studies that concluded that IQ scores averaged 13.5 points lower in children and adolescents with an iodine deficiency. And now recently, I actually was speaking with someone who has done a lot of research on this, and he points out that somebody who actually worked for the World Health Organization who pointed out the deficiency of iodine, he estimated that the entire world, the whole world, would get a 10-point IQ increase if we all had enough iodine. So this is why I want to talk to you guys about iodine and the importance of keeping this in your diet in best ways you can. Deficiency is not only common, it's dangerous. The most serious consequence of iodine deficiency, according to this research article, is something called, they called it cretinism, characterized by a profound mental retardation. There is unequivocal evidence that severe iodine deficiency, let's say that again, unequivocal evidence that severe iodine deficiency in pregnancy impairs brain development in the child. Okay, so if we're trying to grow new brain, if in a baby and we have to have iodine, do you think if we're trying to continue to grow new brain in adulthood that we need iodine? Of course we do, of course. And I think it's so funny, so much attention and knowledge is about what we need in order to prevent these malformations in children, these birth defects in children. We have all this knowledge to know that, but then we forget and think that we don't need these nutrients after we're born. Of course we need to have these nutrients. We got to put more attention on these things. So this is one of the things that I presented in the course because most of those practitioners have access to this company called MediHerb, which is out of Australia. They do really good quality herbals. But I think of this, and I bring this one up because it's called thyroid complex, but I think of it as a brain complex because there's complexity when we use whole foods. And what they're using in this is a whole food form of bladderwrack. Bladderwrack is a seaweed. They use the whole plant, and you'll see in one tablet that provides you with 300 micrograms of iodine, which they say is 200% of your daily value need. Now, just a quick note here on iodine, very debatable as to what the amount is that is needed. There are these two gentlemen called Brownstein and Abrams, and they looked at 15,000 women over 15 years, and they argued very powerfully that that number that is creating that is very, very low. And in fact, this book here, Iodine, Why You Need It, is probably another great resource that I think everyone should consider. That's by Dr. David Brownstein, MD, just to bring our focus back to what this should be. Now, just to finish out what I'm talking about, why I brought this particular product up for this class is because it also provides something called withania or ashwagandha. One of the things that really is challenging to our brains is too much cortisol, too much stress-derived hormone cortisol. And this ashwagandha helps to reduce the cortisol. And finally, there's an herb in there called bacopa. Now, I think a lot of you probably have heard bacopa by now. So this gives you iodine, ashwagandha, and bacopa. And so I'm just going to share this little research article that drives this point home, and that was from 2024, showing that there is a restoration of the hippocampus. Again, we're talking about that part of the brain in adult neurogenesis, which is growing new brain, with recovery of BDNF, that's the brain-derived neurotrophic factor levels. And now this was a rat study, but it is showing that it was helping with brain restoration, bacopa as the herb. Now, herbs, just as a quick note here, there's a lot more we can learn about these, but I always want to make sure that we have the essential nutrients there for the herbs to help us work with. So if we just go after bacopa, but we don't have the iodine, maybe we don't have lithium, maybe we don't have RNA or essential fatty acids or proteins, the herbs may not be giving you the results you're looking for because they don't have anything to work with. So we got to make sure that we have everything to work with in the brain. So let's flip over to some other neuroprotective botanicals that I think are worth noting. And I talked about mushrooms in the very lead up to this video, and I think mushrooms are super important for us to start putting more attention on. According to this study, the neurotropic properties of lion's mane specifically, a medicinal mushroom, says that in conclusion, the aqueous extract of H. erinaceus, which is the scientific name for lion's mane, contained neuroactive compounds which induced NGF, nerve growth factor, something else that we want to talk about, synthesis, and promoted neurite outgrowth in the cells. So this helps again with brain growth, Another study on lion's mane specifically was actually showing the acute effects of lion's mane after a single dose. Now, I had a lot of people turned on to lion's mane mushrooms recently, and I point this out because I will hear people say, "Oh yeah, I took it and I felt it right away." And you always kind of, wonder if that's placebo, and you're obviously usually considering it's probably a placebo. But this did show that there was a significant treatment and time point interaction with the regard to the speed of the performance of this. And it was a 1 hour post assessment. So sometimes you can potentially actually see things happening very quickly. Now, I do point out, I'm showing you guys a lot of research. I often show a lot of research, but we always have to research the research. The research that I share is just the means to begin the conversation, saying, hey, somebody studied this. This is what they found. Let's look at many other aspects of whether or not this is something that we can regard as actual truth and want to incorporate. Now, when it comes to foods I'm talking about, things like sardines and eggs and mushrooms, I think, we can know that there's a lot of value to those, but we don't want to make outrageous claims. So in this one specifically, it said in conclusion, this pilot trial tentatively suggests that they may improve speed of performance and exert a stress reduction effect. However, it is crucial that further investigation is conducted employing larger sample sizes. But a little bit more on lion's mane and brain function, just to encourage you to look more into it. It is a nootropic, meaning it contains compounds that assist in cognitive health and function. Two specific components, the hericenones and the aranacines. I may not be saying either of those right, so if somebody wants to help me out, go ahead. They support nerve and brain health. And evidence suggests that these compounds support the formation of neurons in the hippocampus. We keep talking about the hippocampus in the brain. That's an important one to keep going. And for people experiencing brain trauma, compounds in the mushrooms may play a role in reducing functional losses from oxidative stress that can lead to progression of neurodegenerative diseases. So let's think about this. We talk about these being whole foods, and I always want to bring this back to us. Instead of doing the extracts always, we do want to remember there is a magic in complexity, and there's a lot of synergy in nature. Functional foods like lion's mane work synergistically far beyond what isolated pharmaceuticals can offer. Let me take this to another level just to drive this point home. There is wisdom in the whole plant. This study, so cool, talking about ergothioneine. Now, I was led to ergothioneine because I want to know that mushrooms are working, but I want to know why they're working as best I can. And ergothioneine is one of those things that everybody should know about. So this metabolomics profiling of white button, cremini, portobello, lion's mane, maitake, oyster, and shiitake mushrooms talked about using untargeted metabolomics and targeted amino acid analysis. What they're looking at is these mushrooms that they know have high levels of ergothioneine, which is this very, very interesting nutrient that is being touted as potentially the new vitamin L, and that's a longevity vitamin. Much longer story there, but let me just read to you this point that I wanted to make. Among the 7 mushroom varieties that I just mentioned, that's the white button, cremini, portobello, lion's mane, maitake, oyster, and shiitake, more than 10,000 compounds were detected. Okay, so there's so much we don't even know is in there yet. So each variety had tens to hundreds of unique to mushroom variety compounds. And what I mean by unique to mushroom variety compounds, when we talk about lion's mane, it's that H aranacines. There's those 2 components that I talked about. Those are unique to lion's mane. And that is so cool. You only get those from lion's mane to our current knowledge, to my current knowledge anyway. And they are very helpful with transporting nutrients across the blood-brain barrier. But there were tens to hundreds of unique to mushroom variety compounds found. And these range from 29 in cremini mushrooms. And if you look at populations like in Italy, a lot of cremini mushrooms that are consumed there, great, 29 different compounds in that, fantastic. But 854 for lion's mane. So there's so many more things in there that we don't even know could be doing great things for us. And this is why we want the whole food. We want to eat the mushrooms, not just take an extract of just ergothioneine. We want the whole 854 enchilada. So lion's mane and oyster mushrooms did have the highest concentrations of L-ergothioneine. So those are 2 great choices. And let me just drop this out there to remind us of the value of ergothioneine. There was a Swedish study, and they had looked at over 120 different metabolites, and they found that ergothioneine was the most associated with the greatest reductions in all-cause mortality. And so there's a lot of interesting and exciting information about L-ergothioneine. It is something that helps reduce oxidative stress, specifically in the brain, and our body can't make it itself. It's something we have to get from an external source. That's why they're talking about being a vitamin. We do have a very specific protein transport that seeks it out to bring it into the cell. So that's pretty cool to know that our bodies are looking for it. In fact, before we eat, it upregulates. It's like, oh my God, I hope there's some ergothioneine coming. And now another new thing that I did learn about this, though, that there are microbes in our microbiome, one in particular called L. reuteri that is said to be missing in 96% of our population, that do help create actual L-ergothioneine in our bodies. So it's the microbe that helps make it. Our body doesn't make it. So cool that there's this really powerful nutrient that can do so many things, and it could be called the longevity vitamin that we need to get it from an external source, but we can also make it with the help of the right microbes. Okay. So again, yes, deeper on the ergothioneine, it's called the longevity molecule. These unique properties mean that ergothioneine is much more resistant to auto-oxidation in comparison with other thiols, such as glutathione. Before, I talked about the importance of glutathione being our master antioxidant, and the importance of selenium in making that glutathione, and how mercury was messing up our ability to make the glutathione. But how about if we can actually bring in something beyond glutathione to help us clean up the mess in the form of ergothioneine? And it's very effective antioxidant and cytoprotectant with metal chelation properties as well. Okay, so it may help us get rid of that stinking mercury that's in there. And it may be much more resistant to the auto-oxidation. So that's pretty cool. When they're looking at this in this study from 2023, is whether it's under-recognized dietary micronutrient required for healthy aging. And that is exactly why I'm posting these videos for under-recognized nutrition, so that you know about them and you can make your own decision as to whether you think it should be a part of your life. Now, I do want to talk about this really quick case study that we did have a very encouraging turnaround. And this lady who, her son actually brought her in because he was concerned, because she was calling him with a lot of questions and about, I don't want to get too personal, but it was concerning, and it was very advanced. And so we did bring her in, and we did a lot of things for her. But one of the things that we definitely gave her was the lion's mane mushroom option, and she took it with the lithium option as we showed her the research on it, and we were able to combine them into one thing for her. And it was within days she stopped calling her son. So that was so encouraging. Of course, we're not saying that anything was totally corrected, but we were seeing some very quick, encouraging results with those things. And so when I was presenting this to those practitioners, I wanted to share with them what that was. And it's the Great Minds mushrooms that I formulated. And so that is a combination of the organic lion's mane, and the L-I in here is actually for the lithium orotate combined together. I think one of the most powerful synergies in nature. Okay, but moving on from that, in the interest of giving you all the details without making you sit here and listen forever, the other thing was acetylcholine and memory preservation that I wanted to talk about. And again, I'm showing you pictures of eggs here because eggs are a good source of choline. And this study from the Journal of Nutrition was talking about the effects of ingesting soy or egg lecithins on serum choline, and brain acetylcholine. So it's critical for learning, focus, and forming new memories, and it declines with age and conditions like Alzheimer's. Now, whenever I hear somebody say something like that, I always take issue. I'm like, well, is it declining naturally, or is it declining because we're not getting enough of the nutrients? So acetylcholine is actually known as your brain's memory molecule. And lecithin is a mixture of fats that are essential to cells in the human body. It can be found in many foods, including soybean and egg yolks. In the diet, lecithin is the main source of choline, a nutrient similar to B vitamins. Lecithin is converted into acetylcholine, a substance that transmits nerve impulses. Now, this is a quote from this Lecithin for Dementia and Cognitive Impairment. I'm just going to go a little nerdy scientific on you guys a little bit here, because I want to point out that there is some research that is encouraging us to look at this a little closer. Then there's this research study on lecithin for dementia and cognitive impairment that also said, though, that the conclusions were that evidence from randomized trials does not support the use of lecithin in the treatment of patients with dementia. A moderate effect cannot be ruled out, but results from small trials to date do not indicate priority to a large randomized trial. Now, does that say that we should absolutely dismiss this essential nutrient, acetylcholine being a very important neurotransmitter for our brain? No, I think it's just, again, is a counterpoint, and we want to start thinking about this in terms of, well, why would they come to this conclusion? Even though they do say in here, Alzheimer's disease sufferers have been found to have a lack of the enzyme responsible for converting choline into acetylcholine within the brain. So they are pointing out that there is an enzyme that's lacking that helps to convert the choline into acetylcholine, but they're saying that, actually it doesn't necessarily improve in these cases when they address that. So lecithin is a major dietary source of choline. So extra consumption may reduce the progression of dementia. That was their hypothesis. And so there's some interesting, real dissonance in this article. So let's dig deeper into this, is what I want to say when I'm looking at this. So how is it, though, that we have the U.S. Food and Drug Administration approving multiple drugs for the treatment of dementia in mild, moderate, and severe Alzheimer's disease that are specifically targeted at maintaining high levels of acetylcholine, if this last study says that it doesn't really matter? So how do we get all these drugs approved that are doing this? Now, these drugs, I just want us to understand the mechanism of them. Something like donepezil or these other rivastigmine or galantamine and tacrine, these drugs are like a lot of drugs. Now, I had a recent conversation with a doctor, and he was kind of surprised to learn that a lot of drugs their actions are to inhibit an enzyme. And this enzyme, specifically called acetylcholinesterase, is what breaks down acetylcholine. So their goal is to stop the enzyme so that we maintain the levels of acetylcholine not being broke down. Now, to me, that seems unnatural, and it doesn't seem like the right way to go about it. It's like trying to keep old food around to keep us from going hungry instead of making new food every day. It's like, I always say, it's like, wanting yesterday's donuts instead of freshly made donuts. So why don't we just bring more acetylcholine into this instead of trying to keep it from getting broken down? Because the body's breaking it down for a reason. And these medications are used to treat Alzheimer's disease by increasing the amount of neurotransmitter acetylcholine in the brain. And the acetylcholinesterase inhibitors work by preventing that enzyme, as I just said many times. So let's go deeper. Wait a minute. The enzyme that converts choline into acetylcholine, they said, was also low in these old people. So what is that one? It's called choline acetyltransferase. Okay, so let's look at it from two ends. Is it that we aren't making enough acetylcholine because we don't have the enzyme to convert choline? Or is it because we're converting too much acetylcholine into whatever acetylcholine the enzyme converts that into? Well, let's take a look deeper at this. Choline acetyltransferase catalyzes the reaction between choline and acetylcoenzyme A. Acetylcoenzyme A is a central molecule in metabolism, and your body makes it in several ways. Think of it as a key fuel and a building block that helps produce energy and synthesize important compounds like acetylcholine. So here are the three ways that your body makes that acetylcoenzyme A. I know this is getting really, really granular, and if you're still hanging in there with me, God bless you, because what I'm just trying to get down to is the truth here of this. So if we're saying we don't have enough coenzyme A, we need carbohydrates to make that from one way of making it. We need glucose. So glucose goes through glycolysis. It produces pyruvate. Pyruvate enters the mitochondria and is converted into acetylcoenzyme A by the pyruvate dehydrogenase complex. So what we're saying here is there's a ton of chemistry that's required to be able to make this acetylcoenzyme A, and we can make it with sugar, glucose. But guess what? We can also make it from fats. Okay, so the body says, look, if you don't have enough of this, we'll make it from that. Fatty acids, when your body burns a fat, the fatty acids undergo beta oxidation in the mitochondria. This process breaks them down into 2 carbon units, each becoming acetylcoenzyme A. Okay, again, another great argument to make sure that we have plenty of essential fatty acids to be able to make this enzyme to make those conversions. Again, But guess what? We can also make it from amino acids. Okay. So some amino acids like leucine and isoleucine are broken down into compounds that can become acetyl-coenzyme A. So what am I saying here? Don't just go for taurine, right? Taurine, of course, has its benefits, but we need all the amino acids. And maybe people need that taurine or get an effect from it because they're not getting enough protein in the first place. But if they're not getting all the essential amino acids from a full protein source with a complete amino acid profile, like meats, like sardines and eggs, then you're going to inhibit all kinds of things all over the body. But let's just examine whether or not people are, first of all, getting enough of this, or if they're digesting enough of it and have all the chemistry to help. So I take issue with people saying that you just have this diminishing enzyme in your body, or maybe you just haven't been nourishing your body with everything it needs long-term to make all the chemistry that we need. Now, I also brought this product to their attention as practitioners using this because this is a product that contains soybean lecithin. It contains essential fatty acids, supports the liver's ability to process fats, which we need to be able to process to have all of that. This is a precursor for brain neurotransmitters that helps maintain normal cognitive function, supports cell membranes, and supports nerve function. Now, the thing I like about this company is they're super careful about making any claims. They have to go through all of these hoops, and they have been doing this for well over 90 years. I know that. And the only label claim that they can put on there is that it supports cognitive function. So I want to understand that better, right? Why would this be the only thing that they can say that this does, and why would that be why they made it? So rather than suppressing acetylcholine esterase, as the drugs do, why don't we nourish the system with choline-rich foods like soybean lecithin, eggs, sunflower seeds, and then support the acetylcholine with natural precursors? That's actually going to be, of course, safer and more sustainable and empower the body to do what it was designed to do. Okay, so putting this all together and wrapping this up here, rebuild the brain from the inside out. Nourishment is strategy, not suggestion. You have to nourish for all of this craziness to happen. And to truly protect and regenerate the brain, we must nourish it with purpose. So here are the steps. We went over last time: detoxing with intention, remove the toxins that sabotage brain function, pesticides and heavy metals, solvents, strengthen the elimination pathway, supporting your liver, kidney, lungs, skin, salivary glands for optimal detox. Feed the brain, prioritize these nutrients that we just talked about, omega-3s, protein. We're going to talk about vitamin Bs later as well, iodine, amino acids, trace lithium, all of these things that we talked about today. Use food as functional medicine. You have these new information out there on things like lion's mane and ergothioneine-rich mushrooms and choline-dense foods that support regeneration. Favor whole over pharma because natural sources like soybean lecithin nourish memory and are more sustainable than pharmaceutical interventions. Now, there may be some people out there that say, hey, too much soybean lecithin is going to create a problem in a different area with calcium. And that's true. We want to make sure that we're balancing all of these foods together. That's why I suggest sardines, because they're such an excellent source of calcium, okay? And we want to make sure we're getting all the nutrients together. But think synergistically. Healing doesn't just come from one nutrient. It's the orchestra. It's not the soloist. We need all of these. Whenever you see these research studies out there that talk about, this one particular nutrient being the most important, taurine is the only one that you need to have. No, you need all of them together to work together. And when you just do one isolated component, you run the risk of creating problems down the line. Okay. Thank you for staying in there with me. This was probably not my most elegant talk, but I just mostly want to make sure that I'm making all of these options available to you so you can start investigating and looking into them deeper. Ask me more questions about why I think these are important, why I see clinically these to be relevant and important for people, and why I just want to make sure that everybody has knowledge of all of their options, especially when it comes to nutrients that aren't being talked about. I'm going to continue this series as I continue to teach it for the Institute, and I'll make sure that I'm sharing as much of it as I can with you on this channel, and specifically on this playlist dedicated to keeping your brain healthy. Have a good one.